to all the victims of the tropical storms that have buffeted the Atlantic coast and the Caribbean this season, and I wish a speedy recovery for all who have been affected by this natural disaster. The provisional agenda for this meeting is United Nations peacekeeping operations, reform United Nations peacekeeping operations, implementation and follow-up. The agenda is adopted. I wish to warmly welcome the distinguished heads of state and government, ministers and other distinguished representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. I am also delighted to welcome our distinguished briefers, His Excellency the Secretary General, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Mr. Musa Faki Mohammed, and His Excellency Mr. Jose Ramos Horta, Chairperson of the High-Level Independent Panel on Peace Operations. Before each of you is a list of speakers who have requested to participate in accordance with Rules 37 and 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedures, as well as the previous practice of the Council in this regard. We propose that they be invited to participate in this meeting. There being no objection, it's so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of the Council members to document S/2017/766, a letter dated 22 August 2017 from the Permanent Representative of Ethiopia to the United Nations, addressed to the Secretary General, transmitting a concept paper on the item under consideration. I give the floor to the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I thank this month's presidency of the Security Council, Ethiopia, for being such a steadfast contributor to peacekeeping. Your personnel on the front lines in some of our most challenging missions, and we are extremely grateful for that commitment. Today, we gather to fortify this flagship UN activity. Every day, peacekeepers create conditions for lasting peace. They protect civilians, such as the hundreds of thousands in South Sudan and the Central African Republic who have sought refuge. Across the years and across the globe, 55 peacekeeping operations have successfully completed their mandate. Many political missions have done the same. 4 missions are downsizing or closing soon, their job completing. And the strategies of being able to ensure a smooth transition in these situations are absolutely crucial. Peacekeeping remains a highly cost-effective instrument. The people of Haiti and Côte d'Ivoire enjoy brighter futures thanks in part to the support from MINUSTAH and ONUC. And I pay tribute to the many peacekeepers who have paid the ultimate price in carrying out this vital work. Monsieur le Président, Malgré les succès évidents, les opérations de paix parfois peuvent décevoir, sembler à court de perspective, incapables de mettre un terme à des engagements de plusieurs décennies. Cela nous pousse à une réflexion sur nos objectifs, les moyens que l'on se donne, notre capacité à mettre en œuvre des mandats complexes et à satisfaire les multiples attentes. Les opérations de paix sont déployées dans des environnements difficiles, là où les Nations Unies sont parfois les seules à être prêtes et en mesure d'agir.
is the sole party able and willing to act. Peace operations are subject to significant anticipations, at times too heavy anticipations, insofar as they must address the urgent situations while contributing to long-term solutions. Peace operations often face situations of such complexity that it is illusory to hope that a solution can be provided over the course of a few years.
The high-level independent panel on peace operations, whose recommendations remain at the heart of our efforts to advance collective security, called for 4 critical shifts. My reform efforts aim in part to bring them about. First, we must recognize the primacy of politics, so that peace operations are deployed in support of active diplomatic efforts, not as a substitute. My proposals for the Secretariat Peace and Security Architecture seek to strengthen the link between political strategies and operations, and between peace and security and the development and human rights pillars of our work. If we can do better on prevention, mediation and peace building, we can reduce the unrealistic and dangerous demands on our colleagues in uniform. Second, peace operations should be properly equipped. It's time to fill critical gaps in technology, transportation, and situational awareness. More mobility, better equipment, enhanced training and intelligence would allow us to do a better job, and eventually with smaller numbers. Third, peace operations must embody UN values. Since the earliest days of my tenure, I have sent strong signals of my determination to stamp out sexual exploitation and abuse. In one important sign of progress, Member States are now certifying, prior to deployment, that none of their personnel has a history of misconduct or human rights violations. And the Secretariat also vets certain senior personnel. We have just appointed the first ever victims' rights advocate, and we are taking other strong steps to promote accountability. And in keeping with an organization-wide plan to achieve gender parity, I am making a push for more female officers and troops in our operations. More women in peacekeeping means more effective peacekeeping. Fourth, we must build stronger partnerships. The joint United Nations African Union framework for enhanced partnership signed in April of this year is a crucial step. Beyond their troop contributions, African states have assumed important responsibilities for peace and security in the continent. All across Africa, we are working closely with regional and sub-regional partners, from AMISOM to the G5 in the Sahel to the multinational Joint Task Force in the Lake Chad Basin. I call on the Security Council to enhance its support, including through the clarity of mandates and predictable funding, in particular to the G5, in order to operationalize the force in the Sahel and to the multinational Joint Task Force battling Boko Haram. Our partnership with the European Union is also crucial, and I look forward to signing a framework agreement with the EU and to exploring the possibility of establishing trilateral collaborative mechanisms. And these partnerships are especially important given the multiple tasks that are being undertaken. We now face the needs of peace enforcement and counterterrorism, and the precarious environments in which we take place require an additional effort. And it's clear that peacekeeping forces are not supposed to do peace enforcement or counterterrorism. We need to take profit of the complementarity that needs to exist between the UN and regional and other organizations. I appeal again to the Security Council to ensure in that regard clarity of mandates and adequate funding. Monsieur le Président, au cours des prochains mois, nous allons progresser dans la mise en œuvre de ces réformes qui doivent nous permettre d'être meilleurs dans ce que nous faisons. Dans l'immédiat, j'ai demandé à ce qu'une revue des opérations de paix soit menée afin de voir comment nos opérations en cours peuvent mieux répondre aux nombreux défis évoqués. With your partnership and support, we can adapt peace operations to meet both the old and the new tests alike, to be more effective and more cost-effective. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency the Secretary General for his briefing. I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Moussa Faki Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Union Commission.
Excellence, Monsieur le Président.
Excellency, Mr.
Mesdames,
President, ladies and gentlemen.
C'est toujours un honneur renouvelé et un privilège
pour nous d'être invités for us to receive an invitation to speak before your august body.
Permettez-moi avant tout
Allow me at the outset to convey our gratitude to all member states here present.
J'ai d'autant plus de plaisir à m'adresser à
I am all the more
vous
pleased to address you in the light of the fact that today's meeting is being held under the Security Council presidency, which is presently held by the Federal Republic of Ethiopia. I would like to commend and warmly thank His Excellency, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Ethiopia, for the initiative of having this discussion on peacekeeping operations and for having managed with all other African members of the Council, having managed over lengthy months to build a unity of views. And I think I'm grateful for the remarkable advocacy and awareness-raising work being carried out. And here, we would like to extend our profound gratitude, not only on behalf of the African Union, but also, and particularly on behalf of the people of Africa, whom we always seek to place at the heart of our concerns. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today's discussion affords us another opportunity to take stock of and consider the situation. We have a common, genuine determination in good faith to make progress on the matter of financing operations which are mandated or authorized by the African Union through assessed United Nations assessed contributions. As from our viewpoint, decisive progress over the short term in this regard is a prerequisite for bolstering the credibility of the partnership between our two organizations. And let us be aware of the fact that the numerous exchanges and meetings at the institutional level, they are enriching and as are our declarations in principle. However, they will be futile if specific action and decisions on part of all of us is not forthcoming. So here I would like to reiterate our steadfast determination to promptly reach this resolution with an acknowledgement of our contribution to the comprehensive peace and security architecture by upholding the principle that African Union peace support operations, which are welcomed by this Council, for them to be supported through contributions from the United Nations. For us, this is a matter of justice. I frequently hear mention of the fact that the African peace and security architecture is geared towards delivering African solutions to African problems. This appears to be a restrictive interpretation, to my mind, insofar as we consider the doctrine which underpins the innovative mechanism we have. It appears evident to us that the issues in Africa are not only issues for Africans, and the causes are not rooted solely in Africa. It is a matter of importance for the consequences stemming from the issues plaguing Africa. These do not afflict Africans alone. For the issues, regardless of the causes and the origins, these issues affect Africans primarily, yet the African Union has always assumed its leadership to tackle these matters.
nous ne disons que la complexité des enjeux est prise en cause.
We are not saying that the complexity is being undermined.
Aucune organisation ne peut à elle seule
organization, however, alone can bear the full burden of the necessary response. So it is wise and timely, in our view, for the international architecture to acknowledge, through concrete decisions, to acknowledge the efforts undertaken by the African Union and its member states in this regard. It also appears important for us to underscore that ad hoc arrangements do not enable lasting solutions to be delivered and sustainable solutions to be delivered. Ladies and gentlemen, a resolution on the principles of financing mandated operations for operations authorized by the African Union, which is endorsed by the United Nations Security Council through assessed contributions, would not, in our view, be a mechanism which systematically would open up access to United Nations financial resources. We are aware that the various specific decisions to be taken on a case-by-case basis by the United Nations Security Council and the African Union Peace and Security Council, and the eventual granting of mandates will be subject to a concerted joint process of analysis, of evaluation, of planning, and of submission of a report to the Secretariat, to our Secretariat. From our view, no relevant argument can justify our common shortcomings in failing to uphold this resolution principle. The African Union, like all such organizations, is experiencing shortcomings. We remain determined to tackle them. We are not seeking to have anything imposed on us from outside, but we have an ethical commitment which we set by ourselves, which we have set forth to tackle this ethical need. Our institutional credibility is at stake, but also on behalf of our people, we must do this on behalf of our people for the very reason for the existence of organization. There is also we must take into account the necessary convergence of views. The Chapter 8 of the United Nations Charter must enable regional organizations like the African Union to fully contribute to the maintenance of international peace and security. This in the light of their proximity on the ground, of their knowledge of local dynamics and their capacities for rapid response. In so doing, the African Union confers additional legitimacy to the action undertaken by the Security Council as an embodiment of international law.
Nous donner les moyens d'atteindre cet objectif dans notre intérêt à tous et éviter la posture de confort qui consisterait à évoquer des manquements éventuels de part et d'autre pour ne pas adopter les décisions judicieusement inspirées des situations dramatiques que nous avons connues il y a quelques décennies ou même plus récemment, comme ce fut le cas au Mali ou en République centrafricaine, où nous avons tous dû réagir aux événements quand nous aurions pu faire preuve davantage d'initiative. La démarche de l'Union africaine sur le principe de l'utilisation des contributions soumises à recouvrement ne doit donc pas être perçue comme une quête. Il ne s'agit point de charité, mais bien d'équité. Notre organisation continentale demeure, permettez-moi de le répéter ici, déterminée à traduire dans les faits les engagements auxquels elle a librement souscrit sur son financement et la prise en charge d'une part de ces opérations de soutien à la paix. Nos efforts vont continuer et s'intensifier, indépendamment des réticences actuelles exprimées par certains. Il s'agit, je crois, d'une responsabilité historique et tout un chacun doit l'assumer convenablement. Je voudrais conclure en exhortant votre Conseil à prendre des décisions qui encouragent les progrès remarquables de l'Union africaine et de ses États membres et à rendre hommage aux sacrifices consentis, surtout quand on rapporte les 10 progrès au temps d'existence de notre organisation. On doit reconnaître à l'Union africaine le droit et la capacité de s'améliorer et de se transformer de manière dynamique. Permettez-moi en outre d'engager votre auguste Conseil à marquer de manière concrète et résolue le partenariat stratégique entre nos deux organisations au moyen d'une résolution des principes sur le financement.
through the principle of financing. This should enable us to avoid fueling of criticism, which often is levied against us, particularly by those who provide us with the mandates, our citizens. And we must cut the red tape, which often hampers us from achieving the anticipated results. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Mohammed for his briefing. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jose Ramos Horta, Chair of the High-Level Independent Panel on Peace Operations.
Mr. Prime Minister, Prime Ministers, Head of Governments, Secretary General, Chairperson of African Union, members of the Security Council, permanent representatives. On behalf of my colleagues who serve with me on the high-level independent panel on peace operations, I commend you, Prime Minister, and the permanent mission of Ethiopia for this very timely initiative, and thank you for the invitation extended to me to participate today. With me is my colleague Ian Martin, sitting behind me, and who is very familiar to many of you. It's very gratifying to us that our report and recommendations have been so well received by Member States. Indeed, our report was not written by Ivy League academics or PhD students without field experience. I was privileged to work with eminent achievers with deep experience of peacekeeping and special political missions. After crisscrossing the globe in our consultations, our report reflected the collective experience and recommendations of hundreds of people from many walks of life, retired and serving military and police officers who saw wars up close, community leaders and activists who live in the midst of conflicts. We acknowledge the extent to which former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon embraced our recommendations, the consideration they have been given by the General Assembly and the Security Council, and the work already undertaken by the Secretariat towards their implementation. But the essential shift advocated by HIPPO remains to be achieved. The 3 peace and security reviews of peace operations, peace-building architecture, implementation of Women, Peace and Security Agenda, as well as the World Humanitarian Summit, converge on the crucial need for more effective conflict prevention and for working towards sustaining peace before, during and after conflict. Last month, the Council was reminded of HIPPO's approach to sustaining peace when our colleague Youssef Mahmoud contributed to your discussion of the contribution of peacekeeping operations to this overarching goal. The Council has embraced this priority, and no Secretary General has made a stronger commitment to prevention and the necessary surge of diplomacy than Secretary General Guterres. We see it reflected in his insistence on an integrated, system-wide commitment to prevention, in the way in which he has organized his executive office, in his proposals for reform of the development system, as well as the peace and security architecture, and in his appointment of high-level advisory board on mediation, half of them women, consistent with his commitment to gender parity and HIPPO's emphasis on the role of women in all aspects of sustaining peace. It is national leaders and stakeholders who have the primary responsibility to prevent conflicts and engage in mediation, and the United Nations should seek to support local and regional prevention and mediation partners. Our report emphasized that the UN must invest in its own capacities to undertake prevention and mediation, and in its capacity to assist others, particularly at the national and regional levels. These core UN functions must, we said, be funded under the regular budget and not dependent on voluntary funding. Member States should support the Secretary General in this mediation effort, both politically and financially. Secretary General Ben wisely asked our panel to review peace operations, not peacekeeping missions alone, and he accepted our recommendation that the United Nations should embrace the term peace operations. Our intention was not to move away from the principles of peacekeeping, which we said remain valid. It was so that the sharp distinctions between peacekeeping operations and special political missions should give way to a continuing of responses and smoother transition between different phases of missions. He accepted our critique of the dysfunction of the present departmental configuration, which has hampered the effective design and conduct of peace operations, but rightly left it to his successor to consider a restructuring. I believe that the proposals for restructuring the peace and security pillar, which the Secretary-General Guterres has now outlined, meet the two most major concerns of HIPPO. The management of both peacekeeping operations and large field-based special political missions by the same department will enable situation-specific responses tailored to context and smoother transitions as those contexts evolve. The single political operational structure under Regional Assistant Secretaries General, which would link the two reconfigured departments, will not only overcome duplication rivalry, but will ensure that peace operations are designed and managed within their regional context and in closer consultation with the relevant regional organizations. Our report said that the essential shift we outlined would not be achieved without restructuring. This reform proposal is therefore warmly to be welcomed. The Council has been concerned to see reviews of individual peace operations carried out, and our report itself recommended a review of long-standing missions to assess their effectiveness. We addressed the shortcomings of the Secretariat's policy, analysis and strategy development processes, and stressed the need for a core capacity for strategic analysis and assessment, including in the planning and review of peace operations. We also recommended that independent evaluations of peace operations should be commissioned at key decision points. The Secretary-General establishment of a strategic planning and monitoring unit in his executive office is precisely the reform that has been required to ensure better planning and reviews, with, I hope, an independent element. The Council decision in mandating peace operation on the basis of such planning and review should always reflect the primacy of politics, and I hope that the Council will be stronger in its insistence upon and support the political strategies which peace operations are deployed to pursue. While some reviews may properly lead to reduction of resources, I will remind the Council that both the Brahimi and HIPPO reports emphasize that mandates and resources, expectation and capabilities must be in alignment if peace operations are not to be set up for failure. It is a pleasure to recall, in the presence of Secretary-General Guterres and Chairperson Mohammed, the emphasis our report placed on partnership with regional organizations, in particular the African Union, and to warmly welcome their signature in April of the joint UN-African Union framework for enhancing partnership on peace and security. I reiterate here today HIPPO's support for flexible, sustainable, and predictable funding for the AU peace operations the Council authorizes and for the use of UN assessed contributions on a case-by-case basis. I emphasize, too, our high estimation of the importance of UN regional offices as forward platforms for conflict prevention in partnership with regional actors, of which the successful efforts early this year to resolve the crisis in the Gambia were an excellent example. In arguing for an essential shift to field-focused administration, HIPPO presented the distinct needs of the field. We know that the Secretary-General, coming to headquarters from a field agency, fully intends his management reform proposal to provide the delegation of authority which is absolutely essential to those who provide the services to the field, and to expedite service delivery and recruitment. From the HIPPO perspective, both the changes in management and policy and the operational support which is proposed to be provided to both headquarters and the field by a single department must be rigorously assessed according to their impact in the field. We urge Member States to take whatever decisions are required to support fully such delegation. HIPU's advocacy of an essential shift towards more people-centered peace operations has been widely quoted and should be taken to heart by leadership of every peace operation. Critical for the morale, credibility of a peace operation is effective action to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse. The Secretary General has given the leadership required and has gone far beyond the recommendation we made in 2015. We urge Member States to enter into the compacts he proposes. Mr. President, Excellencies, to end. In the course of 40 years, I first came to this Council, exactly this place. Addressing this Council, I was 25 years old. I was the youngest person in the room. Today, as I survey the room, I seem to be the oldest person in the room. Starting as an innocent and romantic believer in the promises of possibilities of the United Nations, I have seen the best when it lived up to the expectations of the people it deployed to protect, but also shocking betrayals on other front lines. I have engaged with UN personnel in my own country and in remote outposts where dedicated field staff absorb the indifference of headquarters, whose envoys descend on us, when I was in the field, to evaluate the mission, yet things stay the same. The UN can do better. This Council can do better. I trust that today's debate will mark a significant step on the road to the improvements which the high-level panel marked out. I thank you and God bless you all. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Ramos Horta for his briefing. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. Members of the Council have before them document S/2017-781, the text of a draft resolution submitted by Algeria, Australia, Belgium, the State of Bolivia, Bulgaria, Cambodia, Canada, Chile, China, Costa Rica, Croatia, Czech Republic, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Denmark, Djibouti, Egypt, Estonia, Ethiopia, Finland, France, Germany, Hungary, Indonesia, Israel, Italy, Japan, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Montenegro, Morocco, Nepal, the Netherlands, Nigeria, Norway, Peru, Republic of Korea, Romania, the Russian Federation, Rwanda, Senegal, Serbia, Slovakia, Slovenia, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Thailand, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Tunisia, Turkey, Uganda, Ukraine, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, United Republic of Tanzania, the United States of America, and Uruguay and Vietnam. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2017-781 please raise their hand? The result of the voting is as follows. The draft resolution received 15 votes in favor. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2378-2017. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Let me start by expressing our appreciation to the Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his remarks and for his efforts to strengthen UN peacekeeping. We thank Chairperson Moussa Faki for being here with us today and for his commitment to enhancing the UN-AU partnership. We are also grateful to President José Ramos Horta for joining us and for his insightful briefing on where we are in terms of the reform of UN peacekeeping operations 2 years after the HIPPO, which he chaired, presented its report. Ethiopia welcomes unanimously adoption of Resolution 2378/2017, and we thank all members of the Council for their inputs and contribution during the negotiation. We also thank all those members that have co-sponsored the resolution in a demonstration of their commitment to strengthening United Nations peacekeeping as one of the important tools in the promotion and maintenance of international peace and security. The adoption of this important resolution has particular significance for Ethiopia as one of the leading troop-contributing countries to United Nations peacekeeping operations. Our peacekeepers were one of those who were deployed in the early days of the United Nations peacekeeping. They were also among those peacekeepers deployed in the Congo to stabilize the country in the early days of its independence. Ethiopian peacekeepers played an important role in the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide and the civil war in Liberia. Today, more than 8,000 Ethiopian peacekeepers are serving under the blue helmet in Darfur, Abyei, and South Sudan. Ethiopia takes pride in its important role in the UN peacekeeping, and today we are pleased to have made a modest contribution to advancing the reform of UN peacekeeping by proposing the draft resolution we just adopted. Excellencies, we are meeting here today 2 years after major reviews focusing on the UN peace and security architecture were conducted, and also 2 years after the Leaders' Summit on Peacekeeping. Therefore, it is hoped that the debate will afford us the opportunity to reflect how far we have come in undertaking reform of the UN peacekeeping and chart the way forward. I would like to highlight 4 points in this regard. We believe this Council has a key role in strengthening United Nations peacekeeping as its mandates and authorizes their deployment. Therefore, adequate implementation and follow-up of the United Nations peacekeeping reform by this Council in accordance with existing mandates and procedures is absolutely important, and we welcome the decision by the Council today to entrust its working group on peacekeeping operations to review reform initiatives in close cooperation with other member states, including troop and police contributing countries and host countries. Second, as much as UN peacekeeping reform is important, this Council does not have a dedicated debate to discuss this issue comprehensively and assess the progress made. That's why we welcome the decision to have this annual debate on the basis of a comprehensive annual briefing by the Secretary General. It is also essential this discussion takes place at this time of the year when world leaders gather in New York for the annual General Assembly session to keep peacekeeping reform high on the agenda. 3, we all know that the environment under which many peacekeepers operate has dramatically changed, but peacekeepers are not equipped with the necessary capabilities to carry out their mandates and protect civilians while also ensuring their own safety and security. That's why a number of commitments and pledges were made 2 years ago to address this issue, and we welcome the Secretary General providing updates to the Security Council as part of this comprehensive briefing on the continuous efforts made in filling the existing gaps in terms of force generation and capabilities, as well as other relevant aspects necessary for peacekeeping to effectively and appropriately respond peace and security challenges. Number 4, we appreciate the Secretary General's initiative to reform the UN peace and security architecture, both in the Secretariat as well as in the field. It is important that this Council send a political message to the Secretary General welcoming his reform efforts, and we believe his continuous engagement with this Council and the various intergovernmental committees of the General Assembly will be very important in moving the reform process forward. Last but not least, enhancing global regional partnership is indeed one of the most important pillars of reforming UN peacekeeping. Given the current global security dynamics, UN cannot handle new and emerging peace and security challenges alone, and forging effective partnership with regional and sub-regional organizations is the most sensible and logical thing to do. This has already been well recognized now, but what matters at this stage is taking practical steps in this direction in the spirit of Chapter 8 of the UN Charter, including through the sharing of burdens. Let us be frank here. There is a great deficit here, and it is high time that the contribution and the sacrifices of UN peacekeepers and of those deployed after having been authorized by the Security Council is acknowledged in earnest and in a meaningful way. It is indeed encouraging to note that this Council has expressed its intention to give further consideration to practical steps that can be taken and the conditions necessary to establish the mechanisms through which African Union-led peace support operations authorized by the Security Council and under the Security Council's authority under Chapter 8 of the Charter could be partly financed through United Nations assets contributions on a case-by-case basis. Of course, our hope and expectation was that Council would go further than this, and what Chairperson Moussa Faki just told us today captures the sentiments in Africa on this important issue. Nevertheless, we understand the dynamics in the Council, and we will continue to engage with members to make progress on this issue, building on what has been agreed today. We believe this is not only fair and appropriate, it is also in the best interest of our collective security. I now resume my function as President of the Council. I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Macky Sall, President of Senegal.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
I thank you,
Mr.
President.
Hailemariam Desalegn.
Prime Minister
Mesdames, Messieurs
Desalegn
les chefs d'État, chefs de délégation,
Excellences, heads of
Monsieur le Premier
state and
ministre,
delegations.
je voudrais véritablement vous remercier pour la tenue de cette importante réunion sur la mise en œuvre des recommandations du panel de haut niveau sur l'étude de l'ensemble des opérations de maintien de la paix. Ces missions de maintien de la paix sont parfois déployées dans un environnement hostile, où prolifèrent notamment des groupes armés et extrémistes qui prennent pour cible les casques bleus, sans compter l'absence de coopération de certains pays hôtes. Il s'y ajoute que les missions actuelles dépassent trop souvent le strict cadre sécuritaire du maintien de la paix et englobe des aspects tels l'assistance économique et humanitaire, la protection des droits de l'homme et l'aide aux personnes déplacées, aussi bien à l'intérieur des pays que la gestion des réfugiés. Les recommandations issues du rapport du panel de haut niveau ainsi que celles contenues dans le rapport subséquent du secrétaire général préconisent des mesures hardies dont la mise en œuvre effective devrait valablement faire franchir aux opérations de maintien de la paix une nouvelle étape dans le bon accomplissement de leur mission. Je tiens à féliciter le secrétaire général de notre pour sa ferme détermination à faire avancer l'agenda de la réforme des opérations de maintien de la paix. S'agissant des rapports avec les parties prenantes, à mon sens, le Conseil de sécurité devrait renforcer sa coopération avec les États voisins qui se situent les conflits, mais aussi renforcer la coopération, on l'a dit, avec les organisations régionales et sous-régionales, en particulier l'Union africaine. Et dans cet esprit, les 11e consultations conjointes annuelles entre le Conseil de sécurité et le Conseil de paix et de sécurité de l'Union africaine qui viennent de se tenir à Addis Abeba les 7 et 8 septembre dernier devraient aider à renforcer davantage cette dynamique de coopération. Pour ce faire, la définition des mandats des opérations doit désormais être bâtie autour d'informations objectives et complètes, ce qui requiert avant tout déploiement une évaluation franche et claire des exigences, notamment en matière de ressources et d'équipement. Je vais prendre l'exemple de la MINUSMA, que nous connaissons tous, qui est la mission de maintien de la paix au Mali, qui est aujourd'hui la mission la plus meurtrière des Nations Unies, où les casques bleus eux-mêmes sont tués à longueur d'année. Et imaginez ce que serait la MINUSMA sans la présence de Barkhane, de la force française, qui a pris le relais de Serval depuis janvier 2013. C'est dire que malgré les 10 000 casques bleus, au Mali, aujourd'hui, nos soldats sont dans l'insécurité. Plusieurs fois, les pays du Sahel ont demandé à l'Union africaine le renforcement du mandat, pour le rendre plus robuste, et en conséquence, doter les forces onusiennes UN forces with the equipment and the clear missions and mandates that they need. Because as you know, it's not really just a matter of maintaining or keeping peace. Sometimes we have to enforce peace and to save human lives, and we cannot do this against hostile equipped forces who operate wantonly. So therefore, UN peacekeeping mandates must evolve, or we will be spending endless amounts of money. And as we just heard from the chair of the HIPPO, they will be ineffective. Another key issue that the Security Council must look into further is that of strengthening the triangular dialogue between the Security Council, the de contingents et le secrétariat afin de favoriser un esprit de partenariat, de coopération et de confiance mutuelle. Sur les bureaux régionaux, je pense que vous avez raison, il faut privilégier la diplomatie préventive et pour cela, il faut peut-être renforcer aussi la qualité des représentants. Donc, les représentants du secteur général, à mon avis, doivent être des personnalités qui peuvent parler directement aux chefs d'État des régions concernées, representatives who can speak directly with the heads of state of the region and who attract more respect. So we have to think more about this. It's not just a matter of UN officials, but rather an issue of the mediators or the personalities that we engage to bring pressure to bear on some heads of state, because
chefs d'État ou ayant exercé la fonction, ils peuvent apparaître comme étant des doyens par rapport à ceux qui sont en exercice. Enfin, dans le cadre de sa présidence du groupe de travail sur les opérations de maintien de la paix, le Sénégal a contribué aux réflexions sur la mise en œuvre des recommandations du rapport du panel de haut niveau, en organisant des discussions thématiques favorables au dialogue entre les parties prenantes. De même, le Sénégal a co-initié avec les États-Unis d'Amérique la résolution 2320 de 2016 sur la coopération entre l'ONU et l'Union africaine, qui a lancé un processus de consultation entre les deux organisations pour la détermination, pour la définition des modalités et mécanismes devant permettre la prise en charge efficace de cette question. Pour terminer, je souhaite redire ici l'engagement du Sénégal pour les missions de maintien de la paix. Il est louable en effet que le Conseil de sécurité, par sa résolution 2154, décidé
d'immortaliser cette présence sénégalaise en instituant le 8 mai 2014 la médaille Capitaine Baïdiagne pour acte de bravoure exceptionnel. Ceci pour honorer les militaires, les membres de la police et du personnel civil des Nations Unies et du personnel associé ayant bravé des dangers extrêmes au service de l'humanité et de l'ONU. Le professionnalisme de nos troupes passe aussi par leur capacité à s'abstenir de tout acte d'inconduite qui pourrait ternir l'image et la réputation des Nations Unies.
Thank you for your attention, sir.
I thank His Excellency President Sall for his statement. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, President of Egypt.
شكرا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, Your Excellency Mr. Hailemariam Desalegn, Prime Minister of Ethiopia and President of the Security Council, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, members of the Security Council, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to participate in today's meeting of the Security Council on Peacekeeping Operations organized by Ethiopia. At the outset, I would like to welcome the adoption of the Council's resolution entitled Peacekeeping Reform, which is considered a step towards enhancing the UN peace and security architecture. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Egypt has been amongst the very first contributing countries to United Nations peacekeeping operations, having participated in the first ever United Nations mission deployed to the Congo in 1960. Today, Egypt ranks 7th amongst the top 10 true contributing countries. We have participated in 37 United Nations missions with a total contribution of 30,000 uniformed personnel since we began participating in peacekeeping operations across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe. Over the past decades, Egypt responded to the needs of peacekeeping, never refraining from participating in even the most complex security environments while maintaining training, readiness, and capability of its troops as a top priority. Furthermore, its compliance with the highest standards of conduct and discipline and the zero tolerance to any form of misconduct is considered exemplary. Egypt has also contributed significantly to building regional capacity, in particular in the African and Arab region. Mr. President, as we welcome today's resolution on peacekeeping reform, we hope that it will be the first of many steps to ensure effective UN peacekeeping, while focusing on addressing technical and operational gaps, to include a comprehensive approach aimed at preventing conflicts and sustaining peace. The role of peacekeeping and decision-making in this regard needs to be further articulated. In this regard, I would like to highlight the following points. First, without prejudice to the importance of peacekeeping as the most important tool for maintaining international peace and security, it should not be the only tool to be deployed. Peacekeeping should not be an alternative to preventive diplomacy, mediation, peace-building efforts, or any other political, economic, or social tool for addressing the root causes of conflict and ensuring social cohesion. Peacekeeping should not be the initial reaction to every conflict. In this context, Egypt has repeatedly called, especially over the past 3 years, for a new strategic approach. One that include comprehensive and pragmatic political and programmatic plans, as well as adjusting the mandates according to political and operational developments throughout the life cycle of conflict. This approach is in alignment not only with the vision of a number of member states, but also with the Secretary General's vision, whom I must seize the opportunity to commend for his efforts to revitalize the tools at the disposal of the Secretariat, including its political tools. These efforts must be commended and supported. Egypt believes that this strategic approach is crucial in addressing the complex challenges and consequences of armed conflicts. These include, most notably, the weakening of state institutions and the ability to provide basic services, a breakdown of social fabric, and other challenges. This approach is also crucial given the direct relationship between conflicts and the threat of terrorism, organized crime, and other threats and challenges to peace and security. Second, Egypt has always called upon the international community to prioritize its efforts to resolve conflicts rather than simply managing them, which has usually resulted in a status quo for decades with no horizon for a political solution. This is very much evident, unfortunately, in conflicts in the Arab region and the African continent. Conflicts in which we witness relapses due to unresolved political, social, and economic causes. In this context, I would like to echo the 2015 reviews of the UN Peace and Security Architecture, which emphasized the primacy of political solutions as the basic task for both peacekeeping and special political missions at the United Nations. Third, peacekeeping operations, although important, must not be a substitute to the role of governments and host state institutions. Peacekeeping operations must not become trusteeship mechanisms. They must rather provide an enabling security and political environment for nationally owned reconciliation and peace-building efforts in line with the priorities of these states and communities. In this regard, I would like to emphasize that attempts to impose templates for political systems which have proven successful in countries thousands of miles away have repeatedly failed. Rather, we must take into account the political, cultural, and social specificities of every country to ensure the success of our peacekeeping and peace-building efforts. In this context, I would like to highlight the important and central role of peacekeeping operations in the protection of civilians. However, this role must not override the responsibility of the host country to protect its nationals. Peacekeeping operations should rather focus on building host status or host state capacities, rather. In that regard, it is imperative in our view that the mandates of the United Nations missions mirror the priorities and specific needs of those countries. Fourth, allow me to be frank. Attempts to monopolize mandate formulation by some member states without taking into account the concerns of troop-contributing countries does not contribute to the success of peacekeeping missions. In fact, the absence of meaningful consultations with troop and police contributing countries is detrimental to the implementation of their tasks in view of the lack of a common understanding between the Council, the Secretariat, and troop contributing countries. Therefore, I call upon this Council to support the establishment of an effective and institutionalized triangular consultative mechanism between the three stakeholders, the Security Council, the Secretariat, and the troop contributing countries, which would reinforce the agreement on common objectives when formulating and renewing the mandates of peacekeeping operations. Finally, it should be undoubtedly clear that the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security falls upon the Security Council. However, we must also recognize the vital role of regional organizations in conflict zones, as stipulated in Chapter 8 of the United Nations Charter. More specifically, I would like to highlight the role of the African Union, which represents a successful model for partnership with the United Nations. The rehatting of African Union operations into United Nations operations and the success of hybrid operations conducted by both organizations underscore the central role of the African peace and security architecture in conflict resolution, not just conflict management on the African continent. This partnership and cooperation could be further developed and utilized based on the comparative advantages of the United Nations and the African Union. This is particularly relevant at a time when the United Nations is attempting to optimize the use of its resources. In this context, I would like to emphasize the importance of implementing the joint UN-AU framework for enhanced partnership, which was signed in April of this year. Additionally, the United Nations must also develop its partnership with other regional organizations and contribute to enhancing their effectiveness in responding to regional conflicts, in order to develop their mediation and early warning tools, and, if required, cooperate with them in deploying observers and peacekeeping missions. In this regard, I would like to highlight the potential role that the League of Arab States can play in support of promoting peace and stability in the Arab region. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, as one of the top troop and police contributing countries, Egypt is committed to continuing to exercise its regional and international role in addressing challenges to peace, security, and stability, including through its active participation in international and regional organizations and its robust participation and contributions to peacekeeping operations. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency President Al-Sisi for his statement. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Petro Poroshenko, President of Ukraine.
Dear Mr. President, first of all, thank you for making this summit possible. It is only fair that this seminal session falls within the presidency of Ethiopia, a nation with outstanding peacekeeping records. And it's truism that to be up of speed the unpredictable world, UN peacekeeping endeavor badly needs reform, as does the whole UN system. That is why it is exactly the high time to assess the current state of play, ongoing reform efforts, and prospects of United Nations peacekeeping. I sincerely hope that this debate, along with the resolution we have just adopted and which Ukraine co-sponsored, will contribute to this vital exercise. Mr. President, I have to admit that since the last discussion on the issue at the Leaders' Summit in year 2015, the world is getting less and less safe. War and aggression are spreading. Peace and goodwill are in retreat. And our organization, which has created to secure peace and stability in the world, cannot and must not afford to stand aside. It must be proactive, as it was outlined in the reviews of UN peacekeeping and peace-building capabilities. Reviews that regrettably remain under-implemented in practice. In this light, we welcome and fully support the efforts of the Secretary General to develop and implement a robust, comprehensive United Nations reform agenda. Agenda with focus being rightly placed on strengthening the UN peace and security architecture. I see a number of essential ingredients for success here. To begin with, it is truly proactive role of Secretary General in carrying out his responsibility in accordance with the Article 99 of the UN Charter. No less important is the task of protection of civilians that has evolved into an integral part of UN peacekeeping. Due attention should also be given to securing proper funding and sufficient capabilities, including aviation assets, advanced intelligence, and modern technologies. Moving from traditional peacekeeping to the cost-effective, smart peacekeeping is long overdue. Last but not least, I commend your initiative, Mr. Secretary General, to eradicate the scourge of sexual exploitation and abuse. The scourge which continues to overshadow United Nations peacekeeping achievement. Being responsible UN member state, Ukraine signed the relevant contract with the Secretary General. We look forward to its early implementation across United Nations operation. Mr. President, I am proud that Ukraine has been a strong partner of this organization in peacekeeping activities for many years. Ukrainian Blue Helmet have participated in UN operations throughout the world. In many cases, they indeed were instrumental in reaching peace from Balkans to Africa. Ukraine's involvement in UN peacekeeping did not halt even the height of the armed attack on my country by the Russian Federation. But today, we need United Nations peacekeeping shoulder too. As you are well aware, in the year 2014, Russia unleashed the armed aggression against Ukraine and occupied the part of our territory. Russia's mantra that we are not there does not hold water. There are undeniable facts that Russia creates, leads, controls, and sponsors terrorist operations in Donbass. And this is another evidence. This is the idea of Russian officers and soldiers, which some of them which are in the Ukrainian prison for their illegal occupation of Ukrainian land. A 3-year-long Russian aggression has cost Ukraine, more than 10,000 people killed, and over 25,000 wounded, and about 1.8 million internally displaced. In order to restore peace in my country, back in spring 2015, I officially request President of the Security Council to initiate appropriate procedure for deployment United Nations peacekeeping operation in Ukraine. It has since gained additional urgency. The situation is not getting better in the Donbas region. Despite repeated ceasefire initiative, ordinary people continue to suffer. And the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine recorded 169 conflict-related civilian casualties in the period from mid-May to August 2017, with a 26 deaths and 135 injured. Just think of this number. And this is happening in the 21st century in the heart of Europe. People's right to life, liberty, freedom of speech, freedom to continue to be violated on the daily issue. They can be killed for going on a wrong church, speaking on a wrong language, or just disagreeing. If tragedy of this scale doesn't warrant UN peace presence, then what does? In this regard, I would like to reaffirm my request to this Council to deploy peacekeepers in Donbas. We need to move forward on this track. The sooner, the better. And I therefore welcome the start of exchange among Council members on the way forward. Ukraine is ready to participate constructively. I must at the same time reiterate that the road to efficient peacekeeping and eventually to the settlement lies through the unconditional withdrawal of all foreign military personnel, mercenaries, their weapons and equipment from Ukraine. Moreover, reliable international control over the temporarily uncontrolled part of Ukrainian-Russian state border should be secured. This is the key, as there can be no success in bringing peace in Donbas without preventing Russian troops, arms, equipment, and mercenaries to continue to infiltrate in Donbas. Deployment of the UN peacekeeping operation should restore justice rather than freeze the conflict and cement the occupation. And the justice would be to restore Ukraine's sovereignty over its territory. The justice would be to make sure that no one can take away Ukraine's freedom. While designing this mission, all UN peacekeeping principles should be observed. And we will insist that on this throughout the negotiation process, no matter how long it will take. Let me also to reaffirm the invitation of the Secretary General to exercise his authority under the Charter and to send the technical assessment mission to Ukraine. Based on the mission's analysis, possible option of the UN political and security presence in Donbas should be elaborated and presented for further consideration of our Security Council. And we expect such mission to analyze and assess the overall situation on the ground. In conclusion, Mr. President, I would like to underline that peacekeeping remains one of the effective instruments to make our world safer and secure peace. In this regard, let me underscore Ukraine's unwavering commitment to the United Nations peacekeeping endeavor. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency President Poroshenko for his statement. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Michael Pence, Vice President of the United States of America.
Mr. President, Chairperson Faki, President Ramos-Horta, distinguished members of the Security Council, it's a great honor to be with you today in the midst of the 72nd United Nations General Assembly. As we gather at this historic assembly, I know all of our hearts are with the people of Puerto Rico as they face Hurricane Maria and its aftermath, and with the people of Mexico City, even now as first responders and families seek to save the lost and find those that are injured in the midst of the earthquake that's now claimed more than 200 lives. Our hearts and our prayers are with the people of Puerto Rico and the people of Mexico as we gather. We're here today to discuss what I believe is the most important mission of the United Nations: keeping the peace. Let me begin by thanking Ethiopia for introducing today's resolution on peacekeeping reform. It was my honor as Vice President of the United States to cast a vote in favor of this resolution. As President Trump said yesterday in his historic address to this General Assembly, just as each of you, in his words, should always put your country first, we will always put America first. But as his words, and I hope our presence here attests, America first does not mean America alone. As the President said, we will forever be a great friend to the world. And it's because of that commitment that he sent me here today to this Security Council to reiterate our call for fundamental reforms of UN peacekeeping and our determination to see this institution do even more to keep the peace across the wider world. President Trump and I firmly believe that the UN must act to make its peacekeeping operations more efficient, more effective, more accountable, and more credible. Ambassador Haley has previously laid out the United States principles for peacekeeping reform, and we're all familiar with them. Peacekeeping missions must support a political solution, have the consent of the host country. Its mandates must be realistic and achievable. Every mission must have an exit strategy, and the United Nations peacekeeping missions must adjust to progress and failure. In short, when a mission succeeds, we should not prolong it. When a mission underperforms, we should restructure it. And when a mission consistently fails to fulfill the mandates of this Council, we should end it. We urge the United Nations to analyze all peacekeeping operations in light of these principles so that these missions most effectively advance peace across the wider world. After all, keeping the peace is at the heart of the United Nations mission. The very first words of the UN's charter are to maintain international peace. And just yesterday, President Trump challenged this great body to rededicate itself to this noble goal. And I do so today on behalf of our nation before this Security Council. History records that the United Nations was forged in the fading embers of the Second World War, the most destructive conflict in the history of the world. The United States of America, with our allies, emerged victorious, but in that victory, we vowed to come together to prevent dictators and demagogues from ever threatening the peace that we had won through our shared sacrifice. As President Harry Truman told us then, it was not sufficient to, in his words, merely check madmen who would plan world domination, but rather to bring together, again, and I quote, a mighty combination of nations founded upon justice and peace. And so we founded this great body, the United Nations. That was the rallying cry of the United Nations in the 20th century. And so it must be again in the 21st century. But keeping the peace requires more than peacekeeping. It requires action and the unwavering resolve of every country gathered here today. For as President Trump observed yesterday, we are once again confronted, in his words, by those who threaten us with chaos, with turmoil and terror, who seek to undermine the sovereignty, prosperity, and security, all of which the President called the pillars of peace. In Eastern Europe, Russia continues to compromise the sovereignty of its neighbors as it seeks to redraw international borders by force. Radical Islamic terrorism continues to beset nations with barbarous attacks in Barcelona, Paris, London. In the Middle East, the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism continues to flout the spirit of the Iran deal, destabilizing the region and brazenly threatening the security of sovereign nations. And as the world has seen in just the past few days, a depraved regime in North Korea is relentlessly pursuing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, and now, as the President said, threatens the entire world with unthinkable loss of human life. Now, the United States is grateful to see this Security Council unanimously adopt 2 resolutions imposing tough new sanctions on the North Korean regime. But to be clear, the United States of America will continue to bring the full range of American power to bear on the regime in Pyongyang. We will continue to marshal economic and diplomatic pressure, ours and from countries across the world, to demand that North Korea abandon its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. As the President said yesterday, the United States has great strength and patience, but all options are on the table. And if we are forced to defend ourselves and our allies, we will do so with military power that is effective and overwhelming. We call on the United Nations and this Security Council to do more to keep the peace, much more, to confront the threat posed by North Korea. Finally, to keep the peace most effectively, this body must have the credibility to pursue peace by advancing the cause of human rights. It's no coincidence that some of the most dangerous regimes in the world are also some of the worst abusers of human rights. In Iran, North Korea, and other despotic regimes, we see a truth of history borne out once again. Those who subvert the freedom of their people at home undermine sovereignty and security abroad. The United Nations is bound by its charter to foster international cooperation in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all. That was the purpose under which the UN Human Rights Council was formed. But the truth is, the Human Rights Council doesn't deserve its name. As we look at the membership of the Council today, we see nations that betray these timeless principles upon which this institution was founded. Today, the United Nations Human Rights Council actually attracts and welcomes many of the worst human rights violators in the world. A clear majority of the Human Rights Council's members fail to meet even the most basic human rights standards. Cuba sits on the Human Rights Council, an oppressive regime that has repressed its people and jailed political opponents for more than half a century. Venezuela sits on the Human Rights Council, a dictatorship that undermines democracy at every turn, imprisons political opponents, and as we speak, is advancing policies that worsen deprivation and poverty that's costing the lives of innocent men, women, and children. This body must reform the Human Rights Council's membership and its operation. As to its operation, I think of what President John F. Kennedy warned more than 50 years ago, that the United Nations must not become, in his words, a forum for invective. Unfortunately, today, the Human Rights Council has become exactly that. And particularly, the Human Rights Council has become a forum for anti-Semitism and invective against Israel. The Council's Agenda Item 7 actually singles out Israel for discussion at every single meeting, something no other country must endure. As evidence, the Human Rights Council has passed more than 70 resolutions condemning Israel while largely ignoring the world's worst human rights abusers. It is, as President Trump said yesterday, a massive source of embarrassment. And we call on the Security Council and this entire body to immediately embrace reforms of the membership and practices of the Human Rights Council and end the Human Rights Council's blatant bias against our cherished ally, Israel. Under President Trump, the United States of America is firmly committed to the cause of human rights because we are committed to keeping the peace. Keeping the peace requires more than peacekeeping. It requires action, reform. And lastly, it also requires a willingness to call out senseless attacks on innocent people around the world. At this very moment in Southeast Asia, we see heartbreak and assaults on human rights and innocent civilians. It's ultimately endangering the sovereignty and security of the entire region. In recent weeks, the people of my country and the wider world have witnessed a great tragedy unfolding in Burma with the Rohingya people. Recently, Burmese security forces responded to militant attacks on government outposts with terrible savagery, burning villages, driving the Rohingya from their homes. The images of the violence and its victims have shocked the American people and decent people all over the world. And now we're witnessing a historic exodus. Over 400,000 Rohingya, including tens of thousands of children, have now been forced to flee from Burma to Bangladesh, with more following every day. Yesterday, Secretary of State Tillerson discussed Rohingya refugees with Aung San Suu Kyi and urged the Burmese government and military to facilitate humanitarian aid and confront the allegations of human rights abuses. And while we welcome Suu Kyi's comments that returning refugees have nothing to fear, the United States renews our call on Burma's security forces to end their violence immediately and support diplomatic efforts for a long-term solution. President Trump and I also call on this Security Council and the United Nations to take strong and swift action to bring this crisis to an end and give hope and help to the Rohingya people in their hour of need. Unless this violence is stopped, which justice demands, it will only get worse. And it will sow seeds of hatred and chaos that may well consume the region for generations to come and threaten the peace of us all. As I said, keeping the peace requires more than peacekeeping. It requires action, courage, conviction. And so the United Nations must be prepared to do more. For as President Trump said yesterday, if the righteous many do not confront the wicked few, then evil will triumph. When decent people and nations become bystanders to history, the forces of destruction only gather power and strength. So let us rededicate ourselves to the mission upon which this body was founded. The first words of the UN Charter, to maintain international peace, must again be our lodestar, our ideal, and our aspiration. Through reform of our efforts and reform of this institution, through renewed courage to speak and act whenever and wherever the unalienable rights of innocent people or the peace of the world is at risk, we will create, as our President said, a more safe and peaceful future for all mankind. As the world witnessed yesterday, our President is a man of deep conviction and faith. Faith in God and faith in the boundless capacity of peoples and nations founded on peace and justice to improve the world. Well, my prayer today is that this institution might mirror that conviction in renewed ways, with the faith that as we make every effort to pursue peace, that the God of peace will guide us and bless us today, tomorrow, and always, for this generation and our posterity. Thank you, Mr. President, for the honor of addressing today, and may God bless you all.
I thank His Excellency Vice President Pence for his statement. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Stefan Löfven, Prime Minister of Sweden.
Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Prime Minister Hailemariam, for inviting us to this very important event. I thank the Secretary General Guterres for his leadership, including the inspiring intervention at the General Assembly yesterday and here this morning. I thank the Chairperson Faki and also, of course, Mr. Ramos Horta for your report. Few things inspire me more than the energy and the enthusiasm, knowledge, will, and determination of our younger generations. Saida Catalan, a Swedish UN expert, had all of that. She dedicated her life to helping others. Earlier this year, at the age of 35, she and a fellow UN expert, Mr. Michael Sharp from the United States of America, were killed while on a UN mission to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Women and men from countries all over the world have made many sacrifices in the line of UN duty, and some obviously have lost their lives. I would like to take this opportunity here in the Security Council to honor Saida's memory, together with the memory of all those who have lost their lives in the service of peace, and we also would like to offer our deepest sympathies to their families. Ladies and gentlemen, the adoption of the 2030 Agenda and our pledge to leave no one behind illustrates the potential of multilateral cooperation. The joint resolutions on sustaining peace, adopted both by this Council and by the General Assembly, compel us to prevent and address violent conflict. These commitments must guide our work. We must do all that is within our power to prevent outbreaks of violence, mass atrocities, and armed conflict, to ensure that refugees do not risk their lives making unsafe journeys, to ensure that the current levels of humanitarian suffering, the worst humanitarian crisis since the creation of the United Nations, are never experienced again. Because only people who feel safe and secure will have faith in the future and contribute to the advancement of their societies. Now, more than ever, we need to come together for peaceful and sustainable development instead of going at it alone and increasing tensions and divisions. Identifying, addressing, and preventing the risk of conflict must be the front and center of all our efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, for 7 decades, UN peacekeeping has been instrumental to promoting peace and providing the conditions necessary for political solutions. We need the political will, courage, and ability to adapt peacekeeping so that it can remain relevant and adequately resourced and serve as a means to support political processes and solutions. Because achieving and sustaining peace will always require political solutions, no matter how effective our missions are in themselves. Let me mention 3 dimensions that I believe need to underpin UN peacekeeping in the 21st century. First, we must address emerging threats and tackle the root causes of conflict. Drivers of conflict are often transboundary and complex. Many of the crises the world is facing have come about not because we failed to see them coming. On the contrary, the signs of exclusion, marginalization, human rights violence, and political, social, and economic inequality were there, but because we failed to respond early enough or quickly enough. However, prevention means that not only must we choose to heed the warnings when they come, but that we must invest in peaceful societies to avoid the drivers of conflict emerging in the first place. We must address the toughest issues and find responses that may need to be unique to each settling, yet broad in scope. A renewed focus on preventing violent conflict and sustaining peace are the expressed priorities of the UN Secretary-General, and we, the Security Council, should wholeheartedly support him in his endeavor. And let us recognize that the role of peacekeeping also in this regard. More than 118,000 military, police, and civilian personnel are currently serving in 16 peacekeeping operations. Blue berets and helmets from Haiti in the west to Jammu and Kashmir in the east. And we thank the women and men in peacekeeping missions for the work they do every day on our behalf. So peacekeeping and prevention can, should, and must go hand in hand. Secondly, we need stronger partnerships. Combining the UN efforts for peace with those of regional and sub-regional organizations is crucial for success. The partnership between the UN and the African Union is of particular importance. I commend the new partnership framework signed earlier this year. The African Union and its member states are assuming an ever greater responsibility for peace and security. If we want this partnership to achieve its full potential, we must ensure sustainable and predictable financing, as well as clear and clever cooperation on the ground. I would also like to highlight the importance of the European Union as a committed and contributing partner to the United Nations. The Treaty on European Union enshrines the core principles of the United Nations Charter. I hope that the partnership between EU and the UN can be developed even further, as well as the trilateral relationship between the EU, the AU, and the UN. Thirdly, UN peacekeeping should evolve based on evidence and lessons learned. The experience we gain from our contributions can help to improve and develop UN missions to make them fit for purpose. 70 years of peacekeeping has taught us about the need for the full, equal, and active participation of women. Sweden constantly seeks to increase the number of women taking part, and we have so much more to do. We have learned about the need for realistic, flexible, and properly sequenced mandates. The UN system is at its best when it works together as one, encounters in conflict using every tool available to ensure lasting peace. With Sweden's largest current force contribution to MINUSMA in Mali, we are seeking to develop the toolbox by focusing on intelligence. Intelligence and information are key to protecting UN peacekeepers and civilians alike and to underpin informed and strategic decisions. We are learning to work smartly and to pool our resources, and we have painfully learned that peacekeepers must do all they can to protect civilians under imminent threat, and that there must be nothing but full adherence to the UN's zero-tolerance policy with respect to sexual exploitation and abuse. Ladies and gentlemen, since 1948, more than 80,000 Swedish women and men, troops, police, and civilians have participated in UN peace operations, primarily in Africa, but also in other parts of the world. They have worn their UN helmets in desert, dirt, dust, and danger. We see their blue berets in Cyprus as well as in the Congo. It has come at a price, yet our commitment to peacekeeping will not falter. It is not weakened despite the tragic loss of Saida Catalan and many others. Rather, we owe it to them, we owe it to humankind to succeed. I would like to close with the words of former UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, a great leader who lost his life while serving us, the United Nations. And he said, and I quote, "Only they who keep their eyes fixed on the far horizon will find the right road." End of quote. Now, we all know the right road to take. As national leaders, members of this Council, we must choose peace, invest in peace, and deliver peace. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Prime Minister Löfven for his statement. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Paolo Gentiloni, Prime Minister of Italy.
Mr. President, I would like to thank you for convening this debate on the reform of peacekeeping. And I also want to thank Moussa Faki and Ramos Horta for their briefings and commend Ethiopia for the resolution that we approved a few minutes ago. I think that this issue involves not only the role of this Council in maintaining international peace and security, but also the role and the reputation of United Nations. The Sustaining Peace Agenda stresses the need for a holistic approach, covering the UN pillars of security, human rights, and development. Secretary General Guterres went even further in his vision with his peace continuum approach, in the strong conviction that a long-lasting peace can only be pursued by adopting a multidimensional approach across the whole cycle of peace, from prevention to, when necessary, peacekeeping, from post-conflict recovery to inclusive national reconciliation and sustainable development processes. we are now called upon to put in place concrete actions so as to effectively implement this approach. Let me highlight Italy's commitments in this regard as a global security provider. We are very proud of being the first contributor of blue helmets in the Western group and one of the most generous financial supporters. We are committed with current UN peacekeeping operation in Lebanon with about 1,100 units in Kosovo, Cyprus and Mali. Additionally, Italy has provided capabilities to the UN peacekeeping capability readiness system in terms of maneuver units complemented by enables and qualified training for UN peacekeepers based on high professional and ethical standards. We deem essential to adopt a zero-tolerance policy against those blue helmets who have committed sexual violence. It is not only a matter of full respect of fundamental human rights, but also a matter of UN's credibility. Ladies and gentlemen, the implementation of the sustaining peace and peace continuum approaches cannot rely solely on member states' efforts and commitments. The Charter of the United Nations already recognizes a key role for regional organization as well. This Council fully acknowledged them as an important resource to provide local solutions to local problems. In this context, let me welcome in particular once more the recent initiative by the G5 Sahel and its newly established force. The recent agreement and reports of UN Secretary General and the President of the African Union Commission constitute a significant step forward, marking the outset of the strategic partnership between the two organizations and paving the way for a wider approach. Today, African problems are our problems. In order to concretely ensure an effective operational cooperation, we are in favor of exploring the use of assessed contributions for the African Union peacekeeping missions. But I would also like to stress that it is important as well to ensure that the appropriate set of requirements in terms of troop quality, training, equipment and high accountability standards is met. In this regard, Italy is ready to provide its full support, thanks to our Carabinieri and to our defense forces from Somalia to Afghanistan, from Iraq to Libya, in the Sahel, in the Arab Gulf, in the Balkans, and in Eastern Europe. Wherever our assistance is required, we spare no effort to build capacity across the board, from border security to election security, from justice and correction practices to the fight against organized crime and trafficking. We also pay attention to build peacekeepers' capacity to face new emerging challenges, like frequent attacks to cultural heritage. In this regard, let me just quickly remind our Unite for Heritage Task Force, established in cooperation with UNESCO, an endeavor that arises from our common cultural identity and resonates with this Council's unanimous adoption of Resolution 2347 on the protection of cultural heritage in conflict-affected areas. Mr. President, we must ensure that the commitments we have undertaken in support of peacekeeping are effectively implemented. Budgetary and financial consideration are a very, very important aspect. But we must avoid prioritizing cost considerations over peacekeeping missions' effectiveness. This is our main goal, if we want to point at the long-term solution. It is a matter of the credibility of this Council, which needs to demonstrate to the international community its capacity to rapidly and effectively respond to current new international challenges and threats to international peace and security. It is not an easy task, but it is our primary duty established in the United Nations Charter. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Prime Minister Gentiloni for his statement. Now I give the floor to Right Honourable Theresa May, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, thank you to Prime Minister Hailemariam for convening this debate and coordinating this resolution on an issue which is of great importance to the United Kingdom. And I'm pleased to see its unanimous adoption. Thank you to our briefers, Secretary-General Guterres, His Excellency Mr. Moussa Faki Mohammed, and His Excellency Mr. Jose Ramos Horta. The Secretary-General has made reform of the UN's approach to peace and security a priority, and rightly so. This Council has a solemn responsibility that we must uphold. The Secretary-General has called for the UN to become more coordinated in its approach to conflict, seeking to prevent outbreaks of violence before we are forced to send in peacekeepers. I share the Secretary-General's vision for sustaining peace and fully support the steps he is taking to deliver it. For our peacekeepers to succeed, we must have a clear political strategy for resolving conflicts. For no matter how bravely our peacekeepers fulfill their mandate, peace will only come when we get the politics of conflict right. I'm therefore encouraged that this resolution recognises the vital political role of the Council and of the Secretary-General's good offices in resolving conflict. But politics does not stop with the peacekeeping mission on the ground. Just like peacekeepers, this Council must be willing and capable of discharging its duty. Too often we are in deadlock and unable to act. Too often we cannot agree to give a strong message of condemnation when our resolutions are not implemented by states. This Council's own performance in responding to the situation in South Sudan, where there has been conflict for 5 out of the 6 years the country has existed, has been found wanting. So, just as we want to monitor the performance of our peacekeeping missions, we should monitor our own performance too. The UK is proud to be a champion of peacekeeping reform. In September 2016 in London, we held the UN Peacekeeping Defence Ministerial, a landmark event with a communiqué signed by 64 countries that set out a path to better peacekeeping. As we look ahead to the next ministerial in Vancouver in 2 months' time, we must concentrate on delivering the vision we agreed in London and continuing progress made since the high-level independent panel on peacekeeping reported 2 years ago. We want to see better planning of peacekeeping missions, more pledges of the personnel and equipment that the UN needs, and stronger performance by peacekeepers on the ground. And I'm delighted to see those points reflected in this resolution, and will cover them each in turn.